Hello, everyone. I'm Mary-Claire Eiserman, the CEO of Women in Games. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to you all for the second in this series of our Meet the Winners webinars. Celebrating the achievements of women and organisations working in the games industry from all over the world has been a long-standing priority for Women in Games. These webinars give our winners an opportunity beyond the awards ceremony to talk about their work and how they feel about being commemorated within the sector. We are also featuring the studios who support us in bringing these awards to you, and we can't thank them enough. The success of last year's awards has encouraged us to consider and further develop and design our awards to fully recognise the extraordinary talent of those within the gaming and esports sector. After extensive consultation with our community, we're absolutely delighted to be adding some exciting new award categories for 2021. David Smith, our founder, is the Executive Awards Producer, and we have worked closely together to develop and design this year's amazing awards. Full details of our Women in Games Global Awards 2021 can be found on our website. The awards celebration is part of our new Women in Games Festival, taking place over a 2-week period, launching later this year on the 6th of September. David will introduce the new additions to our awards at the end of this webinar. Now, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to our wonderful host and highly valued Women in Games Advisory Board Member, the brilliant and erudite Elizabeth Sampat, who will introduce you to our legendary award winners. Hi, Elizabeth. I hope you have a great session and see you and everyone else again soon.
Thank you so much, Marie-Claire. It's always a pleasure to see you. All right, well, it's going to be a really amazing session, and I feel so honored and grateful to have this opportunity to talk to so many truly amazing women. But before we get into the truly amazing women who are our Lifetime Achievement Award Hall of Fame winners from 2020, there's one other amazing woman that I need to introduce, who is Harinder Sangha, who is here representing Sumo Digital. Hi, Harinder.
Hi, Elizabeth. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Yeah, we're really, we are so proud that we are given the opportunity to not only be a corporate ambassador for Women in Games, but sponsor these awards. They're really important to us. It's, our values at Sumo Group, they really do align with Women in Games. It's about creating a place of belonging for everybody, for all of us, and celebrating not only the women that work for Sumo, but celebrating all the women, all of us that work in this industry. It's really important. I always think, diversity, it's the solution, not the problem, and we should all remember that.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thank you.
All right, now it's time to introduce our amazing panelists. First up is Brenda Romero. Brenda is a BAFTA award-winning game designer, artist, and Fulbright recipient who entered the game industry in 1981. She's worked on over 50 games, including seminal titles in the Wizardry, Ghost Recon, and Dungeons & Dragons franchises. Away from the machine, her analog series of games, The Mechanic is the Message, has drawn national and international acclaim. Hi, Brenda. Good to see you.
Hey, Elizabeth. Great to see you as always.
Yeah, I'm very excited to be talking to you. Welcome and congratulations for winning the Lifetime Achievement Award in 2020.
Oh, geez. Thank you.
Next up is Poornima Seetharaman, who has been part of the gaming industry for over 15 years. And she's had roles varying from game designer to producer to studio head and entrepreneur. She's been part of companies like India Games, which is actually Disney India, Jumpstart, and GSN Games. She's currently a director of design at Zynga. She's worked on franchises like BioShock Mobile, How to Train Your Dragon, Neopets, and Farmville 2, to name just a few. She's a Women in Games ambassador at WIGJ, and is also the founder of Women in Games India. And her induction to our Hall of Fame last year made her the first Indian game developer to receive such an honor. Welcome, Poornima. It's so wonderful to have you And congratulations on that honor, although I'm sure you will not be the last.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Really, really super glad to be here. Hi, Brenda. Yes, fangirling also, so I'm nervous. So, yes, thank you so much for having me here, and yeah, absolute pleasure to meet you and have this wonderful interaction.
Oh, the pleasure is ours for sure. Finally, last and certainly not least, is Catharina Bøhler. She's the CEO and founder of Sarepta Studio, which is a Norwegian game development company focused on creating emotionally impactful and atmospheric games. She has 10 years of industry experience, primarily within the fields of management and game design. Catharina was also the lead designer and co-writer on My Child Lebensborn, a BAFTA award-winning narrative-driven parent simulator telling true stories about children born of war. Catharina is an active contributor to the Norwegian game development industry, and in addition to her leadership role at Sarepta Studio, she is chairman of the board of Norway's first game developer collective, the Hamar Game Collective. Welcome, Catharina.
Thank you so much.
Whew, this is one heck of a panel, I've got to say, before we get started. I just need a moment to take it all in, because you all have had such remarkable and varied careers, and it's so interesting to see the things that you've done that are very, very different, but also very similar in your careers. I have individual questions for each of you, and I'm going to start with Brenda. So as Brenda is probably already aware, I believe strongly that every designer, whether they mean to or not, leaves something of themselves in the systems they design and the games they make. Now, Brenda, you're one of the only designers I've ever met who deliberately makes every single game you work on personal. Whether it's something just for you, like the black box game that you exhibited at Now Play This, or something really commercial like Empire of Sin, or something even as light as your Facebook game Ravenwood Fair. So why? How do you manage to make everything? Do you deliberately put parts of yourself into everything that you make?
You know what's funny that never occurred to me until you said that? I'm like, I don't do that in every game, and then you're listing these, but I guess I do. I don't know, it just occurs to me. I mean, in some sense, it is a nice way to memorialize people. You know, my dad and John's grandmother and great grandmother are in Empire of Sin. It just, I don't know. It just feels like a natural creative expression. I mean, it's, you know, it's not the same as Jackson Pollock throwing cigarette butts into his paintings, but that just feels like something normal. But if it's an autobiographical game, then like Shia Khan Lot, then it's absolutely necessary.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you think, is there anything sort of similar to cigarette butts other than like, you know, memorializing people that you think is your secret signature? Like how can somebody tell that this is a Brenda Romero game?
I think I've gotten, you know, the longer I've been in the industry, probably the systems are more complex and more interwoven. I think it would almost maybe take another designer to see the systems to sort of detect that. With the board games, though, it's like I'm comfortable with things that are uncomfortable. You know, someday maybe I'll make a game that's about happiness, but I don't know. I don't know when that would be. That's not as interesting to me as difficult subjects.
That makes a lot of sense. I had an English teacher who once told me that he considered himself an excellent poet, but he never tried to publish anything because nobody wants to read a poem about a 60-year-old man who likes to eat ramen and hang out with his wife. So
I'd read it. I would read that, though.
Thank you so much, Brenda. Poornima, so in order to write up these questions, I may have done a little non-creepy, I promise, Google stalking of each of you. And I have to say, you are one of the most, if not the most accomplished female game dev in India. And so I'm really curious, as somebody who lives in the UK and who's from the United States, you know, what do game developers in Europe and North America get wrong about the Indian game industry? because it's so big and it's so diverse and it's so accomplished, really. What do you wish that we knew?
I think one of the common notion that people have is that we are largely an outsourcing unit, where we do get a lot of games that we take care of. We run the maintenance for it. We run the live ops for it. So we are not necessarily looked at as the creators, but more like someone who keeps guard, right? But we are both. And we have some amazing indies who are doing this. And when I started in this industry, there was barely any industry at all. Like some of us kickstarted it, and today we are in this place. It doesn't matter whether it is mobile, it's PC, it's any medium, right? And we are longing to do this. A lot of us have the true passion to be part of this amazing gaming industry. And what we have access to is kind of limiting us in some ways. And we would be more than happy to see larger firms coming in and giving us the freedom to explore, to create, to bring our stories to life. And given it is a developing country, it's even harder to get these folks. Like, for example, even consoles are like much more expensive in India. So we are already cutting down the consumers and the developers. Everything becomes so much more expensive, but we are getting there. And I'm hoping more and more companies see this, come into India, look at us as developing studios, and give us the support we need. So that our indies can thrive. We can come up with some amazing games out there, and we can share what we can do, what we can achieve, and be at par. We are still playing catch up, so that's definitely there.
That's incredibly useful to know. And I think that there is so much phenomenal talent in India as a place where games come from. And you're right that a lot of people just sort of write it off as, oh, that's where you get cheap artists and engineers. And it's so much more than that. I really don't want to put you on the spot, but for anyone watching this who's interested in exploring Indian games, can you recommend any of those indies for our audience?
Yes, I would actually recommend you join some of our, we have our communities. We have gamedev.in. Shout out to some amazing indies and industry veterans who are running this. It's a beautiful community for anyone who's part of the gaming industry. And small shout out to our own Women in Games India as well. That's a Discord community that we have started. When you come in here, you can actually access them. Besides that, we do have some indies who are doing some amazing work. We have Palace on the Hill. We have Play-Based Studios, which is doing, then there's Mystic Pillars, which is a game. We have Raji, which has found some really good success. We are trying to get there. A lot of Indian mythological content, stories from different areas, different regions of India. And we are super happy to support them.
That's really exciting. Thank you so much again. Catharina, it's really remarkable. You must be very busy. You're the CEO of Sarepta and the chairman of the board for Hammer Game Collective, which, as I mentioned, is Norway's first game developer collective. So what do you think the value is for collectives like that, not just to the members, but also to the industry at large? Because it seems like it's something special.
Yeah, it really is something special. And I think the collective grew kind of in a very natural way because we were several game studios that were sitting together in an incubator. And after that, we realized that we want to continue learning from each other. And I think, sure, there are different things that are important, like just being able to talk to each other, get advice, pool our resources together. But there's even so many small things, like you don't really even think about. Like when I talk to my employees, and there were certain times in the beginning where we went through some really hard times, and they actually told me that, you know what, I don't think if we hadn't been in the collective, if we didn't have those other employees of other studios to kind of meet up with in the media, in the living room and chat with, we don't think that we probably would have pulled through. So just being able to have this entity where people just feel like a little small, like a little family. We all have our different projects, but at the same time we can help each other out. And it's growing your own like local industry. I think is very important, because if some of the other companies have success, then that will affect us positively. And if we can see that some are hurting, then even though we don't get anything out of it, we still pull our resources in to help those others. And I think that type of community and like altruism really helps building our industry to become stronger faster, especially in a small industry like Norway. We're very new, we're very small, and we for some reason decide to make games that are incredibly difficult to make as our first games, all of us. But then yeah, I think it's really good for the Norwegian industry itself that we decide to be so altruistic, even though, you know, I can't tell my board of directors, well, you've spent all these hours, what did you get in return? It's like, well, we'll see in 20 years, we'll know what I got in return.
That's really remarkable. And I think it's such a beautiful description of how you go from a handful of indies to a scene to an industry in a place. And I know that one of the really remarkable things about women in games in general is how global it is. So there may very well be somebody watching who's trying to figure out how to get from being one person to a scene in the hopes of someday getting to an industry. Do you have any advice for people who are really inspired by what you've done with your game collective and want to try to reach out to others?
Well, I mean, I think it's the most important thing is just to reach out, and that if you don't get answers from people, it might not be that they're not interested, it might just be that they're insanely busy. But to try again and kind of like nudge, going, hi, I contacted you earlier, and just try to figure out what happens around you and join in. And if you feel like there's nothing happening around you, maybe try to set up a Facebook event, you know, just a small thing, and try to meet people together and attend Global Game Jam each year. I think that's a really, really good place to be able to meet other developers.
That's really fantastic advice. Thank you. One of the things that's really interesting about this group in particular, I don't know if as we've been putting these together, if David and Marie Claire are masterminds, or it all just happens to be joyfully random, but it's super interesting to see the similarities and the threads that sort of go between all of the different award winners for each of these sessions. And one of the things that has really struck me about this group in particular is that all three of you have had substantial commercial success. But all of you have spoken at length about the power of games to change hearts and minds and possibly the world. And one thing that I've noticed in my career is that it's not that often that those two things collide. A lot of times you see people working on games for good that don't necessarily make a lot of money. And on the other hand, you see these big companies who are obviously a little bit more interested in reporting back to shareholders than in changing the world through game design. So my question for the three of you, just, you know, a light one to start off, is can games do good and also make money? Or are those two separate aspirations?
Yeah, I mean, I think they can. I mean, they obviously can, right? I mean, so now I can't give you the exact link to the research, but there has been plenty of research which has shown that games that are like match 3 games, that those games can provide a level of relaxation that is equivalent to a low dose of Xanax, right? You know, so I'm positive those games make a ton of money. And they're also, you know, providing other benefits. But I don't think games inherently have to be, you know, that they have to be, you know, something that we would consider a negative in order to make money. I certainly know that, you know, I've played, you know, a lot of my favorite games. They're not, you know, I'm not going to leave those going, wow, I feel inspired to do good in the world. But I do know that those games took me away and I had a good time and I enjoyed myself. And that to me has tremendous value, particularly given how hectic my life can sometimes be.
I think that's a really good point, that had someone start talking about, oh, games are finally starting to do some good stuff like nowadays, and how do you feel about how games have changed and finally became, something that improves people's lives, and I was quite offended, actually, because the games that I played when I was a kid, sure, they're simpler than the games I play now, but they still meant quite a lot to me, and taught me a lot about the world, about ethics. And yeah, in general, games can do so many things on so many different levels. Of course, then you do have the games that directly go out to have some positive effect, like My Child Lebensborn.
Yeah.
There, the goal was to tell the stories of the Lebensborn children and to create a positive impact. And but I think like that can still be a brand strength, right? So even though I mostly do things because I'm just passionate about it, and what I'm passionate about gives me happiness, so in a sense that's very, very selfish. But then I'm supposed to sit down with the board of directors and explain to them, or convince them, to spend money on this project where we can't really say that it's gonna earn money. And also, I mean, we weren't supposed to do mobile games. That's not even our... So it was kind of just a crazy thing. But at the same time, if you think about it, there are many, many ways that you could convince, even if you have a board of directors that are mostly focused on, we need to earn money, we need to do things that aren't risky, to argue that, well, for instance, making a game like My Child Lebensborn, it has some really, really good market value because it differentiates itself from other games, and games that people care about, and games that people play that make them feel like they can do some good, or that they're learning something important. They start talking about that. So I mean, there's so many things you can do, even if you just want to be cynical, for instance, to even use the improvement of the world as a brand strengthening tool. Now, of course, what happened, which wasn't intended, was that our game has actually now led to the creation of a nonprofit organization for children born of war. But that was because we wanted to reach out to a partner and go, hey, let's collaborate with a partner, from the cynical side, that, hey, that just strengthens the belief in our product. And then there were none that existed. And so, because me and my partner Ellen were a bit crazy, we just decided, like, oh, it's okay, well, maybe something can be made. And so so even a mobile game that's supposed to do one thing has also kind of led to this physical operation of something in the real world. And there's like so many different things you can do with the game. Either the game itself can try to do something to improve people's lives, whether or not that's just to make sure that they don't go crazy during a day and just relax, or if it's donating a small amount of money, or using their attention and their the eyes of people to push a good cause. Like, there's so many things. So bit of a rambling, but hopefully that makes sense. I just hope that more people can be inspired to try to play around and see, well, what can I actually do with this game, and hey, could even improve our brand.
Yeah, I think I largely agree with both of them. And I think there are two dimensions to it. So one are the traditional games that we make and the motivation with which the players come and play them. And oftentimes when we are making it, we don't necessarily know. Like, for instance, I played Sims when I was going through a bad time in life, and that helped me. I don't think we think of Sims as a game when we are thinking of games for good or something that helps people necessarily. But it does. So me as a player, I was coping with something, using game as a medium, and using this particular game as a medium to help myself. And then there are specific games. I think there's also this hybrid, I would say, something like a Gris or a Celeste, That Dragon Cancer, which is talking about such sensitive topics, but beautifully gamified, where you can actually check out from the theme of it and still play and enjoy it. But then you also emotionally get connected, and journey, of course, right? When you are just sitting and exploring this beautiful world. And in many cases, I feel like even with narrative content, the choice that is being offered to you as a player, and then you have to make a particular choice, and you're putting yourself there. It doesn't matter, and it can put you on the spot to figure out my decision here in this game world will have its own consequences depending on the choice that I make. And if just that narrative goes into your brain, like at a very subconscious level, something similar happens in real life. You might be just taking a step back and rethinking whether that's really the right choice to make. And that way, I think games can teach you a whole lot more. Like, I think I have learned a lot of history, Greek mythology from games. And that's how it started for me, right? So I feel it's a powerful medium. We can mold it to whatever we want, and still, much like movies and art, it is also up to the consumer on how they interpret this. We can create that change in thinking, and then hopefully make that impact with them. And today, the audience is also changing. They love to consume this content, and more we are making this audience more educated, more knowledgeable. We will also start making profits in these games, which will allow us to actually do some of these games that we really want to do. I know we all have this dream list of games that we want to try, and we will be in a position to do that. So I'm hoping that, as we grow together as an industry of the creators and the consumers, we will be in a much better place to create every possible type of game and still be successful and continue doing that.
I think it's also a bit of a weird thing, Elizabeth, that like what other form of media talks about something for good, right? Like music for good, paintings for good, photography for good. The only one I can think of is like Black Sabbath. That was music specifically designated to be evil, right? But it's like, I wonder, like, as a medium,
I think probably did something good in people's lives, though.
It did something really good in my lives. I love Sabbath. I still do.
See, this is the thing I was thinking about when all of you were talking, is that, sometimes we talk about like game addiction, and we use the words, or people use the words, immersive and escapist, as though there's something bad. Sometimes you've got stuff you need to escape from. So it's really great and useful to have that. All right, before we get more into this, because I feel like we could stay on this one question for the entire hour, I want to really quickly show you guys a video from Rebecca Sampson of Hangar 13. They've been really wonderful supporters of our awards, and we're really fortunate to have them as sponsors.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for this extra special webinar, where we celebrate the Women in Games Award winners from the past years. I'm Rebecca Sampson, Director of Operations at Hangar 13. Diversity and inclusion is incredibly important to Hangar 13, and we continue exploring ways that we can create an environment where all employees can come to work as themselves, whilst feeling empowered and having a sense of belonging. Collaborating with Women in Games for the past 3 years has been an essential partnership for the studio to help make the games industry a welcoming place for women to build their careers. It has been a privilege to be part of such a fantastic organisation, and to watch Women in Games grow from strength to strength, and to expand its global community, which has been more important than ever this past year. As a corporate partner, Hangar 13 is honoured to sponsor the Hall of Fame Award, which helps showcase the outstanding achievements of inspirational women within the games industry. I look forward to hearing from some of these fantastic women today, and hope you all enjoy this very special event. Thank you.
Thanks again to Rebecca and Hangar 13. We quite literally could not be doing this without them. And now, welcome back, everyone. The next question is something that I think goes nicely off of what we were just talking about. Brenda, you mentioned Shia Khan Lot earlier. Catharina, you mentioned My Child Lebensborn. Your collective body of work covers a number of titles that explore both your own personal and national identities and histories, as well as the identities and histories of other groups. I'm sure that there are plenty of people watching who have interest in making games about experiences that are not their own. So what is the best approach to doing that respectfully? Or should we leave those stories to be told by people who live them? Should you have a certain amount of experience under your belt before you try that? Thoughts, advice, comments?
All right. So I think it's when we are trying to say stories of others, sometimes it's needed that we do say it because they may not necessarily have the access to actually say these stories themselves. But when we are trying to look at it from a very personal standpoint, it's best to have someone on board who have actually experienced and gone through this to ensure that we are doing right by them and not creating something else that is just in our head and our biases shouldn't impact that. Having said that, there are some stories that we could say in a slightly fantasy setting, which is not a true story or a documentary or a historical aspect, but we could draw some inspiration and create our own, like even with mythology. We could take some aspects of it, mix it together with what we want to say as a story. And largely as game designers, we are able to tell a story even if we have not experienced it, to put ourselves in that setting, in that mood, and to create this beautiful story that we are weaving around and coming together. But yes, I really, really think that if we are doing something that's accurate, then we should bring someone on board to validate that accuracy.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think it's always incredibly tricky terrain, right? I mean, I spend a lot of time researching the games that I make, but you know, there's a super fine line between appropriation and appropriate. You know, so it's dangerous territory. You know, some stories just are not ours to tell. They're just not. Like, I just wrote a large paper on the concept of tribalography as it relates to media, and tribalography in games will be the next thing. But in it covers that. But yeah, that's a fascinating question. But if we are going to tell, you know, if we are going to tell stories or venture into that, we really better make sure that we have the right people informing those stories, curating those stories, critiquing those stories before we, you know, let a story that's not ours to tell out into the world.
Yeah, I just have to say that I completely agree with that as well. And there's been some projects that some people have asked us, wanting us to do, where I've just kind of said that, well, maybe we could do that, but then we would have to at least. So this is about some stories from people from experiences in Africa, and if I was to ever even try to do something like that, then not only would I want to team up with get someone on board, but since this is such a different, like, I wouldn't even feel comfortable our studio being the game studio doing that. It would have to be a game studio in Africa. So yeah, doing your research, talking to people, getting people on board, who can kind of verify and say, yes, this feels right to me. Yeah.
I think also that that's a really important and interesting point, is that game design, and specifically game systems and game mechanics, I feel like are almost a different language. And so if you speak that language fluently, and you can help somebody who has those experiences but doesn't speak that language, if you can help them translate that, that can be a lot more powerful than you trying to take your assumptions and your ideas of what their experiences are. So that's really interesting insight. Thank you, Catharina. Before we move on to my last question, I just want to remind the audience that we're going to be doing Q&A. So feel free to start asking your questions, and we will get to them in a little bit. But I have one last question that I'm dying to ask all of you, which is that you are an incredibly multi-talented group. Each of you has done a TED Talk. You're eloquent speakers, you're accomplished writers and mentors and teachers and managers and entrepreneurs. And with the awards and accolades on the screen, each of you could do whatever the hell you want. So after winning a lifetime achievement award in this industry, why games still? Why games now?
A lifetime achievement award better not mean we need to leave, right? Yeah, I don't know that I think if I deliberately decided to do something else, I would somehow manage to turn it into a game. Right? Like I just would turn it into a game. I've never done anything else. And there's certainly times when games is maddening, and when you wake up at 9 and you feel like you went to bed at 8:30. When it's all consuming, you swear you're never going to do it again. You're never going to make another game again. But there's also this just incredible beauty and this delight of seeing how games work and how things come together, and a unique ability to create an experience that somebody else that you don't even know gets to be a part of. That'll always feel like magic. So I mean, it's more why not games. My answer is really easy. I've been making games 40 years. I'm qualified to do nothing else. So mine's really easy.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with Brenda. I mean, she's been here for so long and we are still waiting to see new things from her, right? And that's exactly what it is. We have so many stories to say. I feel even if I finish my dream project, I have another in the pipeline. It's like a never-ending queue that keeps coming in. And there have been tough times where I almost thought maybe I should get out of this industry, but it's just kept drawing me back into it. Even when the other roles that I've played, I keep coming back to like game design because I want to create something. I want others to be able to consume it, something that I made. And in game design, we talk about feedback loops. I think that's what we all go through during every game development cycle. We get into that when the dopamine hits, we are all set to go again. Keep getting rewarded, keep getting powered up and going through it. And I feel, I mean, I have, same as Brenda, I have not known anything else. I have been only doing game development since I started. And I feel comfortable here. And anything I say, I feel like, oh, maybe this we could make into a game. This works for a great visual novel. This works for a great puzzle. Oh, this is beautiful story. Imagine how great it would be if it is interactive. So it just goes back into that again and again. And I think just being in love with this medium so hard, it's just, I don't think I will ever be out of it.
Yeah, it's the same for me. And I mean, I wanted to be a writer when I was small, but then I realized that I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons as a dungeon master since I was 8 or something, and just needing to take these complicated rules and changing them in a way so that my friends can still bother playing, and seeing how that works, and just the way they react, and not only them going through my story, but them also changing my story with their kind of input. And it's just a wonderful feeling. And of course, I also feel that it's an amazing industry to be in. Like, a lot of us feel uncomfortable being around a lot of people, but I'm never comfortable around other game developers. Working together with my team is amazing. It doesn't really feel like I've been doing any work. I think the only thing that could ever have me potentially quit would be maybe me not feeling that the industry is not good enough for me, but maybe that I'm not good enough for the industry. But still, I think I wouldn't be able to give up anyway. So yeah, it's just, I don't understand why not everybody is into game development. It's actually, we collaborated with techno pilot for My Child Lebensborn, and she was a producer working, with different projects and documentaries as well. And now she's doing game design. So we got another one. Hooked for life, I think.
That's what we like to hear. It's so remarkable how similar each of your answers are about that. And I know that there's been a ton of debate about whether games are art, and that's for other people to talk about. But one thing that's very clear to me, at least listening to all of you, is that game developers are artists, because nobody, like, you answered it as though I asked Van Gogh, why paint? Like, why not paint? Would that question doesn't even make any sense to me. And I think that speaks very well of your work and why you're here. Before we move to audience questions, we have one last message from our sponsors, a really exciting promotional reel from Sumo Digital.
The brave, bold, heroic Sack Boy.
A struggle for freedom, the likes of which our world has never seen.
Oh, hello.
We're coming for you.
Thank you again, Sumo Digital. And once again, welcome back to our panelists. It is time for the very first Q in our Q&A, which I think is really good. So for all of you, what are the best and worst pieces of advice you've ever received, and why?
Okay, I'll go. So I think the best piece of advice I've got is put yourself out there. You have to market yourself. No one's going to know you exist otherwise. So I have been, as hard as it has been, I've been trying to do that. And the worst piece of advice I got is stop being so emotional. You will not be taken seriously if you continue to be this emotional about everything. So, and I refuse to acknowledge that advice. I continue to be passionate about whatever I do. And it has got me this far, and I encourage that people should be passionate and emotional about what they are working on. So yeah, those are mine.
I think, well, the best advice is a little bit difficult. I think the best advice was maybe, hey, try Dungeons and Dragons. Because it got me down a path that, yeah, has led to all this, I think. Worst piece of advice, and anybody who knows me will know I will rant about this for hours and hours, is for game developers to try to earn money on real things, and then you can do your art on the side. Which is just the most insane, bad business advice I've ever received. And this was from an incubator. And they just didn't believe that games could earn money, and it's just because they didn't know how. So yeah, please do not try to do other businesses to somehow fund your games, because it's your games that you're supposed to be earning money from.
I think the worst piece of advice, it's tough because there's a couple that are tied. probably the worst piece of advice was being told by a family member not to make the games that ended up leading me to a BAFTA. So I sometimes ask them if they have any other ideas about games that I shouldn't make. So that's probably the worst one, but I guess it also comes around to be the best one. My brother, the best piece of advice I got, I was in college and heading out to go write manuals for a living, but I really wanted to keep making games. And my brother said to me, follow your bliss and the money will follow. But he was a professional musician, so he was coming from a similarly creative place, but just do what you love, the money will come. And it doesn't even matter. You just need enough to eat, right? But yeah, so just do what you love. And that was many years ago that he said that.
I know I'm not a panelist, but I feel like it would be remiss if I didn't share the best advice that I ever got, because it was actually from Brenda. I used to work for Brenda back in 2011, and it was my 30th birthday, and I had been in the game industry for less than a year. And I think the 30 under 30 list had just come out. And of course, having joined the game industry at like 29 and a half, I was in my feelings about the fact that I would never be on one. And I ran into Brenda in the work kitchen, and she wished me a happy birthday. And I was like, thanks, I guess. I just, now I'm 30 and I thought I would have taken over the world by now. And Brenda looked at me like I was the stupidest person she'd ever seen and said, Elizabeth, why would you ever want to take over the world? That's just taking over somebody else's IP. We're game designers. Make your own world. And I have never forgotten that, not once. So thank you again, Brenda, for the best piece of advice I've ever gotten.
I forgot about that story until you got to the end, but it's true. Make your own IP. That's the value.
The next question from our audience: what is the game you wish you had been involved in the creation of?
I have to actually say that I don't have one. But after playing Final Fantasy VIII, that's when I realized, like, I want to participate in something as amazing and beautiful as this. But yeah, there's not been one game where I felt like, oh, I wish I could have worked on that one, because, yeah, I guess I'm just too focused on my own products.
For me, I think there are multiple, but the closest one would be Gris. And that's largely because of one of the pet projects that I have in my head. And Gris is largely similar to it in many forms, in the way it's represented, in the way it communicates emotional connect. That's targeted towards everyone. There's no language barrier, right? So yes, I think Gris would be one of those.
Mine, it's interesting because I'm sort of the same idea. There's no game that I wish I was also involved in, but I wish, I like studying games and how do people create something that's truly great? Like, how did that happen? And I have wished 1,000 times that I had a ringside seat at the creation of Doom. I've got, I have a ringside, I'm about as close to ringside as you can get. But of course, I'm hearing, I hear all these different stories, but man, I would have loved to have just been there and just sell a seat so I can just sit there and watch how these things happen. I would have loved that.
It's so tricky, right? Because there are games that would spring to my mind, but there's also something very different about the experience of working on a game and getting to play it. And so if you got to work on your favorite game, would that sort of be like knowing how the magic trick was done?
Or I would have wrecked it, right? Like, I never made a first-person shooter, right? So I would not have wanted to work on Doom, but man, I would have loved to have seen it created.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I get that. I think that's an interesting way to look at the question, is sort of being a fly on the wall. So another question: how has the industry changed for women in your time, and how do you see it changing in the future?
Yes. I mean, there's been a lot of changes since 1981. I would say in 1981 there were a handful of women in the industry, and I knew all of them. I think probably the biggest change in the industry in my career has been the internet, and that's brought great things. We can distribute games. Loads of people who would never have really had a chance to even make games can make games now and can distribute their games from all over the world. The internet has also brought with it fire, and lots of, probably one of the more dangerous aspects of our job is being a woman on the internet. So I think for me, that is the single biggest change, and the fact that that there are so many more women. I was on a panel the other day, and not only did I not know anybody, I'd not even heard of anybody, I was just delighted, that the industry has now expanded to a point where, like, I don't know who I didn't say that out loud, right? But like, all of you are new to me. This is like, these are 9 new people that I've never met, and that's fantastic. We're continuing to grow, and I hope that keeps happening. I hope games keep expanding beyond where they are. Yeah, but I mean, everything's changed in the time that I've been here.
Yeah, so, well, I've only been in the industry for 10 years and in Norway. So for me, actually, nothing has changed yet. But I do hope, because in Norway, I feel like it doesn't really actually matter if you have ovaries or not. That's not important in what you're doing in at least our industry. But I did notice going to the US for GDC that sometimes people react very strongly when I say that I'm CEO. And I'm hoping that in the future, their reaction is going to be as, okay, cool, as it is in Norway.
Yeah, I think so. While the industry is still nascent in India, but we have seen the difference from when I started. It was a similar story like what Brenda said. There was just a handful of women, and we all knew each other. And today that's changed. I still would like to see the change a little bit more drastic, I would say, because right now it's growing at a very snail's pace, and for us to catch up, it's going to take a lot of years. And we want that to come in faster. And the worst thing I see is the attrition of women in the game development. So they do come in, but they don't stay for too long. They feel like it's better that they belong to another industry. So to create that sense of belonging is something a lot of companies are working towards, to make it more diverse, not just in terms of gender, in all other aspects as well. So it's improving for sure, and everyone's taking measures to do right by people and make sure talent is there or mentorship is there. In many cases, so many of the students that I talk to, they don't even know that they can come into the gaming industry without being a gamer. They think that's a prerequisite, that they have to play so many games. And yes, there are some disciplines where we expect you to understand it, but then there are so many other supporting disciplines where you don't, and you come in and then you convert into a gamer, right? So it's good to see this right now, but I just want to see a lot more women. Yeah, that's it.
I think that this is a question that I would love to hear Poornima answer specifically, because I know that you're a WIGJ ambassador, as well as a Hall of Fame award winner. So I'm really curious about what are the ways in which WIGJ has really helped and supported you in India?
Oh, I think it has been immense for me. The best part about it was, I remember when I had entered my nomination, and this was largely because of 2 people. One was Ernest Adams, and the other is a friend of mine, Soumya. And they actually encouraged me. We keep having these chats, and they have always told me that one of my best advice is that, right? Like, put yourself out there. And I did, and I put myself out there, and that's it. I just closed it, and I was not even thinking of it. I'm like, I'm done. I have done my part. And then when it came through, it was a huge validation to be nominated. And I used the word validation in one of the interviews. They asked me, why are you saying validation? This is recognition for sure, but why are you saying validation? I said, no, for me, that is validation, because I feel like I've spent so much time in the industry and I still don't feel validated. Everyone acknowledges you, say like, you've been here, you've done this, it's great work, but there's never been a sense of validation that came. And I think for me, that's what Women in Games brought. And it also encouraged me to start the community that I've been thinking about for a while. And I'm like, why would people want to follow me and, be part of this community that I'm building? I have been doing it on the sides, helping women, mentor them, and helping anyone who reaches out. And besides that, I never knew I could make that impact. And sometimes I have to promote myself and be out there to create that impact. And as introverted as I am, it's harder, but have to put myself there. And today we are building that lovely community to make sure there are more and more women from India being part of this amazing awards and being part of this beautiful community. And I'm glad to see that it has encouraged a few young game developers who have joined this community, and they have become ambassadors here, and they're interacting with the larger game development across the globe, right? Like this is not limited to a country anymore. So yeah, it's brilliant. I think it has given me the right encouragement, validation, and recognition.
That's really wonderful to hear. We're getting close to the end of time, but this last question is so good that I want to, maybe you guys can try to answer it briefly, but I'm super curious, so I don't want to skip it. What's the best memory of like a eureka moment that was triggered from something that was happening in your real life that led to a solution for a design problem you were struggling with? So something like if there's a moment where something that was like, on the TV show, the medical drama TV shows where the doctor's having a conversation with their best friend and then an orange hits somebody in the head and they're like, oh, I know exactly what it is. It's jaundice. Like, have you had any really good moments that where all of a sudden you knew exactly what you should be designing and how?
I have one that's the other way around, which I was going through an area that had just been hit by a hurricane. I was traveling through Houston, and I'm Elizabeth, you certainly know I don't fly. So I was driving from somewhere to California, driving through Houston, and thought I'm going to take the second exit and go left to get gas. Because I knew that the first exit, go right, is where most people were going to go, just from having designed many levels. And I was right, I got gas. That sounded so wrong. I was able to put fuel in the car, is what I was trying to say. My God, that's just a classic line right there. Please delete that. But that's my real life story.
Well, I for one am very glad that you were able to get gas in Houston.
Yeah, I think for me, it was not necessarily a eureka moment, but it was a very funny moment. I had a bunch of colleagues arguing about, we had a fishing zone in the game, and they were like, how are we going to pop up the inventory, the bait? How do we do that? And, I think the discussion went for like 30 minutes, and I've been sitting there and I'm like, why are you not using a bait bucket? That's what everyone takes for fishing. And they were like, yes, that's exactly what we want, what we were looking for. And I don't do fishing. And I'm like, I've just seen this. And so that was not necessarily eureka, but it was like a real life, very simple scenario that helped in design.
And for me, I don't think it was necessarily something that was happening in my life at the time, but we were talking about a design problem or design challenge that we had, just talking about, you need to be a parent in this game, but how do we show these scenes that are so horrible? I'm just sitting there and just thinking about, well, what would it be like in real life? And it's like, well, it wouldn't, because you wouldn't be there, and it's like a huge element from in the game that doesn't seem like it should be there, because everybody, like everything that's supposed to happen in the game happens off screen. But it's just, well, that's how it's like in real life, and if you want to try to create somewhat of a semblance of the frustration someone would feel, then you have to try to see which elements you have in real life that can be taken from that.
And I just quickly noticed the tag, the person who asked the question, and I realized that's a friend of mine. So hi, Vimal. Great question. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a really great question. So thank you for asking it. All right. Thank you all so much for being on this panel. I feel like I could talk to you for another hour, but you are all very busy CEOs and entrepreneurs and studio heads. So I will let you get back to your evening. But thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for everything you've done for the game industry. Preemptively, thank you for everything that you're going to do for the game industry, since clearly none of you are going to be quitting anytime soon. And I just want to remind everyone, one of the things that we touched on in the Q&A is the idea of putting yourself out there. So the awards for next year are wide open, and we take self-nominations too. So if something like this resonated with you, if you're willing to take that jump, don't wait for somebody else to nominate you, because you are good enough just as you are. Thank you so much, everyone, and I will see you back for the next one of these in a series.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.